The first time I caught her in my fields, she was wearing a sun hat and a smug look, holding a clipboard like she was surveying land she owned. She didn't. I do. And I'm not the type to let that slide. My name's Nolan Vexley. I retired early from a 20-year career in city planning, bought a quiet 5-acre property on the edge of a suburban development, and thought I'd finally found peace. Then came the HOA and their queen, Patricia Alcott. Patricia was the president of the Westwind Hollow HOA, a woman in her late 50s with a sharp jawline and an even sharper tongue. She walked like she owned gravity and talked like she wrote the law. Technically, my land sat just outside the HOA's jurisdiction. But that didn't stop Patricia from trying to extend her reach. She called my wildflower field an eyesore and claimed it didn't conform to neighborhood landscaping standards. I laughed the first time she said it. She didn't. She actually tried to fine me. "You can't fine me, Patricia," I said, arms crossed on my porch. "Oh, I absolutely can," she snapped. "The HOA board voted to include your lot in our domain." "Without my consent," she raised her eyebrows. "We don't need it." That night, I went through county land records. Sure enough, they'd filed a bogus annexation request completely illegal without unanimous owner approval. I gathered the documents, contacted a land use attorney I knew, and prepared for a war I hadn't asked for. Then came the trespassing. I just installed a few trail cameras when I caught her twice in 1 week walking deep into my wildflower fields, trampling young shoots while taking photos, probably for some HOA violation report. I confronted her that second time. "You're trespassing, Patricia," I said, holding up my phone. "Smile, you're on camera." She didn't smile. "This land is under HOA review. I have every right to inspect it." "No, you don't. You're on private property. Leave, now." She scoffed and walked off like I was the one in the wrong. That was the breaking point. I spent the next day setting up a perimeter of motion-activated sprinklers along the field's edge. I buried the hoses, calibrated the sensors, and tested the timing. My field was now a splash zone waiting for a trigger. Legal? Absolutely. It was still my property. 2 days later, the trap was sprung. I heard her before I saw her talking to someone on her phone as she strolled right back into the field, clipboard in hand. The moment she crossed the invisible threshold, jets of water erupted from the ground in a full arc, soaking her from head to toe. "What is this?" she shrieked, spinning like a panicked cat. I stepped out from behind the barn, holding my coffee. "Welcome to my irrigation system," I said. "You're watering my wildflowers." Dripping and furious, she stormed off without another word, but I knew Patricia. She wasn't going to let this go quietly, and neither was I. The next morning, I found tire tracks on the gravel path that cut along the edge of my property. They weren't mine. Someone had driven in during the night. No rain, no runoff, no reason for fresh tracks. I followed them with a flashlight and a clipboard of my own, taking photos. They ended behind my barn, right at the old gate I kept padlocked. The lock was gone. Not broken, removed. Inside the gate, the wildflower rows had been trampled in a wide arc. Someone had walked in circles here, like they were trying to make it look messy. A few markers I'd used for soil testing were snapped in half. I crouched down near one and noticed something glinting in the dirt, a gold clip-on earring set with a fake pearl. I didn't need a lab to tell me whose earring it was. I called the sheriff's office. Trespassing was one thing, vandalism was another. But removing a lock and entering private land at night, that was criminal trespass at the very least, maybe even attempted sabotage considering the soil damage. Deputy Langley arrived just before noon. He was tall, weathered, and had the kind of calm demeanor that made people confess things they hadn't done yet. I handed him the photos, the earring in a plastic bag, and a copy of my land deed. "She's been warned before," I said, standing by the gate. "This time she went too far." Langley examined the broken soil, the gouged tire marks, and the missing lock plate. "We'll need to question her," he said. "You willing to give a formal statement?" "Already typed and signed," I said, handing him a folder. "And I've got trail cam footage." "Haven't reviewed it yet." That evening, I plugged the memory card into my laptop. The footage showed exactly what I expected and more. At 2:43 in the morning, headlights swept across the far side of the field. A black SUV pulled up alongside the gate. Out stepped Patricia, wearing a dark windbreaker and headlamp. She walked directly to the gate, looked around, and produced a key. She had a key. She didn't pick the lock, she opened it. The camera caught the flash of metal as she slipped it from her pocket. Then she entered and began stomping through the rows, yanking up markers and taking something small from a pouch. She scattered it across the soil in handfuls. I zoomed in. The bag was labeled in yellow print. I recognized the brand and herbicide. I called Langley again. By dawn, he had a copy of the footage and a printed still of Patricia's face under the headlamp. I also handed him one of the wildflower samples already wilting from the chemical exposure. She salted the soil, I said. That's deliberate destruction of agricultural land. Langley nodded slowly. That's a felony. He left without saying much else, but I noticed the way he gripped the still photo. Like it wasn't the first time he dealt with her. By mid-afternoon, the word had spread. I didn't tell the neighbors. I didn't have to. The sheriff's cruiser parked in Patricia's driveway for over an hour, long enough for a few curious residents to gather across the street, pretending to prune hedges or check mailboxes. When Langley finally returned to his car, Patricia wasn't with him. She came storming across the road 30 minutes later, her face flushed like she'd swallowed a bottle of vinegar. "You set me up," she hissed, marching up my porch steps. "I didn't invite her in. You brought this on yourself." "There's no proof I did anything illegal," she snapped. "There's footage of you trespassing, unlocking my gate, spreading herbicide, and destroying property," I said calmly. "That's more than proof, that's prosecution." She paused, staring at me like she was trying to invent a new version of reality on the spot. "I was conducting a soil inspection," she said finally, "to ensure compliance with community environmental standards." "This isn't a community lot," I replied, "and you're not a licensed inspector." "You'll regret pushing this," she said, stepping back. "The HOA has resources. Lawyers. Influence." I leaned against the doorway. "I have evidence and the law." She turned and walked away, but not before hissing something under her breath that sounded like traitor. That night, I got a call from a neighbor I didn't know well, Donella, from 3 houses down on the cul-de-sac. She spoke quietly, like she didn't want someone overhearing her. "I saw something," she said. "Last week, late at night, Patricia was out with 2 board members near your back fence. I think they were mapping something. Did you report it?" "I didn't think much of it until now," she admitted. "But I can testify if it helps." "It will," I said. "Thanks." The next day, I filed an injunction. My attorney, an old colleague from my city planner days, helped me draft a motion to prevent Patricia or any HOA affiliates from stepping foot on my property. We included the footage, Donella's witness statement, and field samples showing the herbicide damage. We also submitted a formal complaint to the state's Environmental Enforcement Branch for unauthorized chemical dumping. But it didn't stop there. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived. Inside was a notice from the HOA's legal counsel declaring their intent to obtain easement rights across the back of my property for community beautification access. They claimed the land had once been part of a greenway project, completely false, and that the HOA had historic usage rights. I laughed. Then I handed it to my lawyer. He filed a counterclaim the next morning, citing fraudulent documentation, abuse of authority, and malicious intent. We attached scanned copies of every land survey from the last 20 years, all showing clear boundaries, 0 easements, and no record of any greenway. Then we went public. At the next town council meeting, I requested 2 minutes to speak during the open forum. I brought a poster board with stills from the trail cam, copies of the fake easement letter, and a blown-up version of Patricia's herbicide bag. I kept it simple, factual, no ranting, just evidence. When I was done, the room was dead quiet. Then someone from the back muttered, "She did what?" After the meeting, 3 more neighbors approached me. One, a retired schoolteacher, admitted Patricia had fined her for excessive lawn gnomes and later threatened to lien her house when she refused to remove them. Another said his dog Run had been called a visual disturbance and was ordered taken down, despite being approved 2 years prior. The third, a widower who'd received a violation notice because his porch light was too cool in temperature. Each of them had saved paperwork. Each of them was ready to speak up. By the end of that week, we had 10 sworn statements, 5 witnesses, and a dozen photos of similar abuses. What began as a trespass case was snowballing into a full-blown investigation of the entire HOA board. Then Langley called again. "Just a heads up," he said. "We've got a warrant to search the HOA's office. Bank statements, emails, the works, and your footage helped trigger it." I didn't say anything for a second. "Appreciate the update," I finally said. "Let me know if you need anything else." "We will," he said. "And Nolan, good work standing up." I hung up and looked out over my field. The damage was healing. The flowers would grow back, but Patricia's rain, that was already wilting. By the time the county environmental investigator showed up, the wildflowers Patricia had poisoned were already curling in on themselves like scorched parchment. He wore a plain gray windbreaker and carried a field test kit with half a dozen vials. As he knelt beside the wilted stems, I stood nearby, arms crossed, saying nothing. I didn't need to. After a few quiet minutes, he stood and sealed the sample bag. "That's a restricted-use compound," he said. "Not something you pick up at a garden center." "Thought so," I replied. He didn't ask how I knew. I'd worked on enough zoning cases to recognize the yellow stamped bags used by licensed contractors. No homeowner had legal access to what she dumped in my soil. "Violations serious," he added, glancing toward the distant rooftops of Westwind Hollow. "Could be federal, depending on how she got it." "Already handed everything to the sheriff," I said, "including the footage." His eyes narrowed slightly. "If she used a commercial-grade defoliant without certification, that's beyond local enforcement. That's EPA territory." He left with the samples, promising to loop me in once the lab report came back. I didn't doubt him. Government investigators don't talk much, but when they do, they mean it. That evening, my lawyer Brandt called. "They're rattled," he said. "The HOA's legal team filed a motion to delay your injunction. Claimed procedural confusion due to recent board transitions." "Board transitions?" "They kicked 2 members out this morning, replaced them with Patricia's loyalists. They panicked." "Exactly." But here's the kicker: the county clerk flagged inconsistencies in their filed amendments, backdated signatures, matching handwriting on separate lines. It's amateur fraud. I stepped outside as he spoke, shoes crunching against gravel, and watched a hawk glide low over the field. The quiet was deceptive. "Do we have enough for a formal fraud complaint?" I asked, working on it. "You'll want to be at the next council meeting. I'll be there too, and bring that earring. It's more than evidence, it's leverage." The following week, I took his advice. The town council chamber was packed tighter than I'd ever seen it. Folding chairs lined the walls. People stood at the back, whispering in low tones. Patricia was already there, seated beside her newly appointed treasurer, a man with a tie too tight for his thick neck and a face like he'd bitten into something sour. She didn't look at me, not once. When my name was called, I walked to the podium, held up the clear evidence bag, and said nothing for 5 long seconds. "This earring," I finally said, "was found near a broken gate on private property. That property is mine. That gate was opened without my consent. And this," I held up a printed still from the trail cam, Patricia's face illuminated under her own headlamp, "shows exactly who trespassed, destroyed protected flora, and scattered a regulated chemical across my land." Murmurs rose. Someone in the back whispered sharply. The council chair raised a hand for silence. I wasn't finished. Per the county's agricultural code, this constitutes sabotage of registered land use, punishable by fine, civil penalty, and potentially criminal charges. But that's not all. The HOA board under Miss Alcott's direction, submitted a fraudulent annexation document. I held up a copy, with forged signatures and fabricated easement claims. We have handwriting analysis, timestamp inconsistencies, and a notarization from someone who hasn't lived in the state for 3 years. The murmurs became full-on shouts. The council had to call a 5-minute recess. I didn't sit. I stood at the front of the chamber, document still in hand, as Patricia whispered furiously to the man beside her. Her face had gone pale. After the recess, Councilwoman Rojas, a no-nonsense former prosecutor, took the mic. "Mr. Vexley," she said, "are you formally requesting the board review the HOA's charter for potential revocation?" "Yes," I said, "effective immediately." Motion noted. That night, I received 3 anonymous notes in my mailbox. One was an apology signed only with an initial. One contained copies of HOA email threads that showed Patricia instructing board members to pressure Vexley into compliance. The third was a printout of a bank ledger funds marked Community Improvement, being rerouted to a landscaping firm owned by Patricia's nephew. Brant's voice practically buzzed through the phone when I read him the entries. "She's cooked," he said. "That's embezzlement. We forwarded everything to the county DA's office. 2 days later, investigators showed up at the HOA's offices with a warrant. I didn't watch the search, but I heard the stories. Neighbors said files were hauled out in boxes. Digital records, too. Even the office printer was taken, and Patricia, she stopped showing up to meetings. Just disappeared behind her blinds. Some said she'd been placed under house restriction pending charges. Others claimed she was trying to cut a deal to throw the rest of the board under the bus. But the damage was done. Her kingdom had collapsed. The HOA's interim president, a quiet man named Ellis who ran a local hardware store, called me a week later. "We've dissolved the annexation claim," he said. "Unanimously. No interest in touching your land again, Mr. Vexley. Appreciated," I said. "Anything else, actually?" "We're reviewing all standing violation notices. Most of them shouldn't have been issued at all. If you have neighbors who were impacted, tell them to reach out." I passed the word along. Donella, the retired teacher, and the others all had their fines revoked. The dog run stayed up. The lawn gnomes returned in greater numbers. But I wasn't finished. With Brant's help, I filed a civil suit not just for the damaged crops, but for violation of property rights, attempted defamation through fraudulent claims, and emotional distress from the sustained harassment. We named Patricia personally, along with the HOA as a corporate entity. The hearing was set for midsummer. The day before our court date, Brant called with news. "She's trying to settle," he said. "Wants to avoid a public trial." "What's she offering?" "A payout. Full cost of field restoration plus damages. 5 figures. "It's not about the money," I said. "I figured. But if we reject the offer, it goes to trial. That means depositions, public records, news coverage." I looked out over the field. The wildflowers were returning. Slow but steady. "Resilient. Let's go to trial," I said. "People deserve to know exactly what she did." That night I received one last letter, no return address. Inside was a single line typed, "You should have just mowed the field." No signature, no threats, just bitterness on paper. I pinned it to the barn wall, beside the still of her face under the headlamp. As the court date approached, more neighbors came forward. One man admitted Patricia had threatened to revoke his gate access unless he voted her way in a board election. Another found out she'd been skimming from the community pool budget, billing the HOA for supplies never delivered. The case snowballed. On the first day of trial, she showed up in a beige suit 3 sizes too stiff, flanked by 2 attorneys who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I wore jeans and a button-down. Brant carried the same folder he'd started with, now thick with evidence. We didn't need theatrics, just facts. Over the next 3 days, we laid everything out: the footage, the forged documents, the bank transfers, the chemical tests, the earring, the fake easement, and the personal testimonies. Her defense tried to discredit the footage, but the timestamp matched the sheriff's report. They claimed the bank records were misinterpreted. Brant produced the accountant's affidavit. In the end, the jury didn't take long. They ruled in our favor. Full damages, plus punitive compensation. Patricia was also referred for criminal prosecution on multiple counts: trespassing, environmental violation, fraud, and embezzlement. I didn't cheer. I just shook Brant's hand and walked out into the sun. The field was mine again. The lines were clear and the sprinklers still there. Just in case anyone else forgets who owns this land, the morning after the verdict, I found a white envelope taped to the inside of my storm door. No postage, no return address. Inside was a copy of an old plat map, one I recognized from my city planner days because it bore the faded stamp from a discontinued zoning commission. Someone had gone through the trouble of circling my land in red ink with a note in slanted cursive. "You're not done." I stood there on the porch, holding that scrap of intimidation, and felt none of the unease they were probably hoping for. If anything, it confirmed what I already suspected: Patricia hadn't acted alone. She may have been the face, but someone else had been feeding her maps, documents, and access. I brought the envelope straight to Brant. "This is from someone with access to the old municipal archives," I said, laying it on his desk. "Not the kind of thing you find on Google." Brant turned the map over, then pulled a file from his cabinet marked Westwind Hollow Expanded Inquiry. He slid out a list of names: former board members, contractors, advisors. One name was underlined twice: Leo Fendricks. I hadn't heard that name before. "He's not on the current board," I said. "He was," Brant replied. "Served 3 years as treasurer before resigning, but he still owns a parcel in the center of the subdivision. Patricia signed off on a landscaping grant he filed last year, almost $25,000. The work was never done, and no one questioned it, not until we reopened the books. That afternoon, I drove out to Leo's property. It wasn't hard to find. His house was the only one with dust-covered scaffolding still half wrapped around the porch. The lawn was patchy, the shutters mismatched. It didn't look like $25,000 had passed through this place. I knocked twice. A man in his early 60s answered, wearing a threadbare vest over a collared shirt. His eyes were sharp, calculating. "You're the flower guy," he said. "I'm the one whose land your partner tried to poison," I replied. His face twitched, only slightly. He stepped outside and shut the door behind him. "I don't know what you think you're doing coming here," he said, "but you've made enough noise." "That's funny," I said. "Because from what I can tell, you've been pretty quiet while money disappeared." He didn't respond. "I've got records," I continued. "Invoices from a landscaping company that doesn't exist, signed by you. Patricia authorized the payments, but the LLC dissolved 2 years ago." "Care to explain that?" "I don't owe you a thing." "No," I said, "but you owe the state and the IRS." That got his attention. He took one step back, glanced toward his driveway. I followed his gaze. There was a second vehicle parked there, a black sedan with a county plate. Someone else was visiting. "Mind if I ask who's here?" I said. Leo didn't answer. But I didn't need him to, because the front door opened again and a woman in a navy suit stepped out, holding a leather-bound notepad. She looked at me, then at Leo. "You must be Mr. Vexley," she said. "I'm with the state attorney's office. We're conducting interviews regarding misuse of public funds." "Good timing," I said, handing her the envelope with the plat map. "He just tried to intimidate me with this." She flipped it open, nodded once. "Thanks." "Mind if I contact you for a follow-up?" "Please do." As I walked back to my truck, I heard the click of a voice recorder turning on behind me. Leo's tone had changed. He wasn't defensive anymore. He sounded cornered. Back home, I found Donella waiting by my mailbox. She had a folder under one arm and a nervous look on her face. "I didn't know who else to trust with this," she said, handing it over. Inside were copies of emails between Patricia and Leo from over a year ago. They discussed more than landscaping grants. There were mentions of strategic acquisition, forcing compliance, and one chilling line: "If we make him the problem, the board can take it." He was me. This came from my husband's old laptop, Donella said quietly. He used to serve on the compliance committee. He stepped down last year when Patricia started pushing out dissenters. Why didn't he come forward sooner? He passed in March, I nodded. This helps. A lot. Later that week, Brant and I met with the lead investigator from the state attorney's office. We handed over the emails, the map, and a full timeline of Patricia and Leo's interactions, matched up with the bank records we already had. The investigator, a former federal prosecutor named Elaine, took detailed notes. You're not just looking at corruption, she said. This is racketeering. They tried to use the HOA as a front, I said. They did use it, and they nearly got away with it. The case shifted again, this time to the state level. Brant and I were no longer just plaintiffs, we were primary witnesses in an active criminal investigation. Over the next month, we sat for multiple depositions, turned over every bit of documentation, and reviewed transcripts of phone calls intercepted under warrant. It turned out Patricia had been pushing for the HOA to quietly purchase parcels under the guise of community enhancement, with the goal of converting them into short-term rental properties. Leo handled the shell companies. Another board member, now under house arrest, had been drafting phony improvement proposals to justify the purchases. My field was supposed to be the first acquisition. They thought you'd fold, Elaine said during our final debrief. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Court proceedings began in early fall. The charges included conspiracy to commit fraud, environmental violations, misappropriation of funds, and racketeering under state law. Patricia pled guilty to avoid a lengthy trial and was sentenced to 18 months, with 5 years of probation and a lifetime ban from holding office in any HOA or civic organization. Leo wasn't as lucky. He fought the charges, blamed Patricia, claimed ignorance. The jury didn't buy it. He got 3 years and a fine large enough to liquidate most of his assets. The court ordered restitution to every homeowner who'd been fined under false pretenses, including reimbursement for legal fees. Ellis, the interim president, stepped down once the dust settled. He left the HOA in the hands of a newly elected board people who had lived in the neighborhood for years, but had never been allowed near a decision. They reached out to me later that month. We want to make things right, the new president, Marla, said during a visit to my porch. We're dissolving the enforcement committee. All future changes will go to public vote. Sounds like a good start, I said. We also wanted to ask if you'd be interested in helping us draft new bylaws, ones that actually protect property owners. I considered it for a moment, then I nodded. Let's make sure no one else deals with what I did. The wildflowers had returned by then, not all of them, but enough to show the land was healing. I walked the rows every morning, checking for signs of new growth. I replaced the broken markers, reseeded the damaged patches, and watched as bees returned, slow and purposeful. One morning, as I adjusted a sprinkler head near the edge of the field, I saw a boy on a bicycle stop at the corner. He stared at the flowers for a long time, then waved. My mom says they're prettier than anything in the HOA park, he called. Tell her she's welcome to visit, I replied. He grinned and pedaled off. I turned the sprinkler back on. It arced high and clean across the row, catching the morning sun. No more threats. No more schemes. Just water, soil, and peace, finally.